I is the name that anything that knows itself gives to itself. A tree does not call itself I, because a tree does not know itself. It is not aware of itself. A table does not call itself I, because it does not know itself. A body does not call itself I, because it does not know itself. It is not aware of itself. A thought does not call itself I, because a thought does not know itself. So what is it that calls itself I? Whatever it is that calls itself I must know itself. It must be aware of itself. Whatever it is that knows itself must be knowing. Whatever it is that is aware of itself must be aware. Only that which is aware can be aware of itself, or indeed any other thing. So only that which is aware calls itself I, or is worthy of the name I. In other words, the name I doesn't refer to anything that is known. It refers to that which knows. Ask yourself the question, what is it in my experience that knows or is aware? Don't answer that question with a word or a name. Allow the question simply to take you, as it were, to that which knows or is aware. When I say allow the question to take you to that which knows or is aware, I subtly imply that you are one thing, and that which knows or is another, or is aware, is another thing which you can be taken to or you can approach. That is obviously not intended. We are that which is aware. We cannot be taken there. We cannot go there. We cannot be taken to what I am. We are already what I am. I am already I. That which knows itself is obviously present and knowing, or present and aware. If it were not present, it would not be present to know itself. And if it were not aware, it would not be able to know itself. So the name I is simply the name that is given to that which is present and aware, and is simply aware of itself. Another name for I is simply awareness, meaning that which is present and aware, or the presence of that which is aware. In other words, our knowledge of ourself is awareness's knowledge of itself. Only I can know anything about I. Only awareness can know anything about awareness. Ask yourself the question, do I, awareness, ever experience the appearance or disappearance of myself? Or, in my own experience of myself, am I, awareness, ever present? Go back to the analogy of the physical space in this room, only add the quality of knowing or awareness to it. So imagine that the space in this room is a knowing space. Does the knowing space of this room ever experience its own appearance or disappearance? It experiences the appearance and disappearance of people, of objects. Even the four walls of this room once appeared to the space and will one day disappear. But what about the space itself? In your imagination, has the space, the knowing space of this room, ever experienced its own appearance? Could it ever say, look, there, I just appeared? And could the space in this room ever witness its own disappearance? Could it ever have the experience, look, I have just disappeared? Drop the analogy, go back to yourself. I, awareness, have the experience of the appearance and disappearance of thoughts, images, feelings, etc. But do I, awareness, ever have the experience of the appearance or disappearance of myself? See in this way, in the simplicity and directness of your experience, that in my own experience of myself, I, awareness, am ever present. Not always present, because without reference to the objects of experience, in other words, referring only to myself, I have no knowledge of time. I am simply ever present now. That is what eternity is, the ever-present now, not a moment in time, but simply this ever-present. So don't be put off by the word eternal. Don't imagine that the word eternal refers to some abstract realm that only philosophers speak of. It is simply a word that is used to describe your experience of yourself. Awareness is knowledge of itself, not some extraordinary experience, not some enlightened awareness, not the way awareness might become if we practice for long enough or meditate hard enough, but it is a word that is used just to describe the nature of the very ordinary, intimate, familiar awareness with which each of us is currently aware of our experience. The simple, intimate, familiar awareness to which the name I refers. Ask yourself the question, do I, awareness, find any limits in myself? If the imaginary knowing space of this room were to look around itself at the objects and the people and the walls, it would find limits there. Everything it encounters would have a limit. It would be finite. Finite from finir, meaning to stop or finish. Everything the knowing, the imaginary knowing space encountered would be something that started and stopped, or began and ended. But if the imaginary knowing space were to look at itself, to take a sample of itself, it would find no limits there. Drop the analogy. Be aware of the experience of simply being aware. And you, awareness, ask yourself, do I find any limits in myself? I find limits in all the thoughts, images, feelings, sensations and perceptions that I encounter. All of these begin and end. But what about my experience of myself? Do I, awareness, have any experience of any limit in myself? Remember again that we are not philosophizing about some abstract awareness or consciousness, or some extraordinary or enlightened awareness. We are not having an intellectual discussion with ourselves about the nature of ourselves. We are just being simple, practical, experiential. Simply investigating the nature of being aware, the nature of that which is called I or myself. Do I have any knowledge of any limit to myself? Or, in my own experience of myself, am I without limits or unlimited? Recognize in this way that just by looking simply, clearly, honestly at your experience of yourself, you find no limits there. You find nothing finite in your experience of yourself. In other words, if we stay simply, closely with the evidence of experience, in my own experience of myself, I, awareness, am without limits or not finite or infinite. Don't be put off by the word infinite. Don't think that the word infinite describes some abstract philosophical or metaphysical realm. It's just a word that is used to describe as accurately as possible the nature of ourself, not ourself how we might become, not an enlightened self, but just the self, the ordinary, familiar, intimate self that each of us knows ourself to be now. Just as eternal means having no dimension in time, so infinite means having no dimension in space. In my own experience of myself, I, awareness, simply have no dimensions. I am not something in time and space. I'm not describing something extraordinary. I'm just, within the limits of language, trying to describe our experience of ourself. We are literally not in time or space. We are eternal and infinite. Intimate, ordinary, familiar, but at the same time eternal and infinite. In order to indicate that our eternal infinite self shares none of the limits or the destiny of the body, and that it does not appear in time or space. The religious traditions gave it a name that had nothing to do with the body or the world. They called it God. And for this reason, people, misunderstanding the name, came to think that God was something abstract, at an infinite distance from the body and the world, at an infinite distance from ourself. Whereas in fact, the word God simply refers to that which shines in the midst of our experience. That which is present in us, as us, ever present and without limits. That is commonly known as I. In other words, my knowledge of myself is awareness's knowledge of itself, which is God's knowledge of himself. Three different ways of expressing exactly the same non-objective experience. Notice that when experience arises, and by experience I include all thoughts, images, feelings, sensations and perceptions, that it always arises within you, awareness. No experience enters awareness from the outside. Just check this in your experience. See if you, awareness, can find a place that is outside of yourself. When we have a dream at night, the dreamed world does not enter into our mind from the outside. It appears within our mind. It is generated by our mind. It is made of our mind. The dreamed world is, as such, the activity of our own mind. That's all there is to the dream, our own mind and its activity. What is the stuff that the dream is made of? The stuff that our mind is made of. Likewise, everything that awareness encounters in experience takes place within itself. It is generated by itself. As such, all experience is the activity of awareness. Just as nothing appears in the dreamed world that is other than the activity of our own mind, so nothing appears in experience that is other than the activity of awareness. And just as nothing that appears in the dreamed world compromises the nature of our own mind, likewise, nothing that appears in experience compromises the nature of awareness. Just as our own mind remains our own mind throughout the duration of the dream, so eternal, infinite awareness remains eternal, infinite awareness throughout all experience. It never ceases to be eternal, infinite awareness. It never becomes something temporary and finite. Just as in a dream our own mind never becomes the dreamed world. It never becomes something other than itself. So in experience, eternal, infinite awareness never ceases being itself. It simply colors itself with the activities of thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving, but never becomes or knows anything other than itself. It is only through the activities of thinking and perceiving that eternal, infinite awareness refracts itself into an apparent multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, but never, in fact, ceases to be or know its own eternal, infinite self. This means that everything that is experienced, be it a deep depression, a moment of ecstasy, or the taste of tea, is simply this one intimate, indivisible, eternal, infinite reality, refracting itself through the activities of thinking and perceiving, and appearing to itself as an apparent multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, but never being, becoming, or knowing anything other than itself. It's what the Sufis mean when they say, everything is God's face. Everything is the face or the image of a single, intimate, infinite reality. It's what William Blake meant in rather more rational language when he said, when the doors of perception are cleansed, everything will appear to man as it is, infinite. It's what Cézanne meant when he said, all I'm trying to do in my painting is to give people a taste of nature's eternity, the eternal reality that appears as nature. It's what Pasolini said of his films, I am trying to restore to reality its original sacred significance. It's what we are trying to do here, to restore to reality its original sacred significance. In fact, we are not trying to restore reality. Reality needs no restoration. It is always in its original condition. We are simply trying to allow the original nature or the original condition of reality to shine in our experience.